Good evening. Welcome to First Parish. My name is Reverend Ann Mason. I'm the minister of this congregation, and I am delighted to welcome you to our concert of I Go On Singing, featuring Tony Brown, Regie Gibson, and Simon Andrews. This concert is a joint production with the Belmont Unitarian Universalist Church, where my husband Simon Andrews happens to be the assistant music director, and with our church, First Parish, where I'm the minister. And we are excited to be doing this together as a joint effort. This evening, because of the generosity of both of these congregations, all of the money which we will ask from you during the intermission will be going to the Lewis Brown Institute, and we will be having Chaplain Tina speak about that during the intermission. But just so that you know, if you have checks that you would like to write, please write them out to First Parish and put Lewis Brown in the memo line. I just had a note from our sexton. Because of the construction on the side of the church, there is no exit out the back. There was supposed to be a chain that was going to be down, but it's not. So we will have to have you all go illegally out the one-way street, the way that you drove in. So I will have a special dispensation saying nobody will be arrested for driving down that one-way street. And our sexton Bob will be out there to make sure that it's a safe thing for you. So I don't want you to worry about that. Restrooms, there is one restroom here, and there is multiple ones down the stairs. We will have a brief intermission. If you need to use that then, you're more than welcome to. At the end of the concert, I hope that you will stay and enjoy refreshments and have the chance to speak with Chaplain Tina and with Tony and the other performers. I have had the opportunity of witnessing this rehearsal process, and I am so excited about the work that our performers are bringing tonight. Paul Robeson's life is such an important life in our country, and Tony was telling me that he does this work so that he can keep Paul Robeson alive in our hearts and in our memories, because he was a towering figure. So I hope that you enjoy the performance, and I am grateful that you're here. So sit back. If you would please silence your phones as well, so that we don't have that interruption, I would be grateful. Enjoy the show.
Because my father was a slave and my people died to build this country, I'm going to stay right here and have a part of it just like you. And no fascist-minded people are going to drive me from it. Is that clear? I got a home in that rock, don't you see? I got a home in that rock, don't you see? Between the earth and sky, thought I heard my Savior cry. You got a home in that rock, don't you see? Poor man Lazarus, poor as I, don't you see? Poor man Lazarus, poor as I, don't you see? Poor man Lazarus, poor as I, when he died he found a home on high. He had a home in that rock, don't you see? Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that band all dressed in red, God's gonna trouble the water. It looks like the band that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. Everybody wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Get on board, the little children, get on board. The little children, get on board. The little children, there's room for many more. The gospel train's a-comin', I hear it close at hand. I hear those wheels a-rumbling and rolling through the land. Get on board, the little children, get on board. The little children, get on board. The little children, there's room for many more. The fare is cheap and all can go, the rich and poor are there. No second class upon this train, no difference in the fare. Travel and freedom are inseparable in the enslaved African psyche. The Underground Railroad is a prime example of this and was the first human rights organization in the United States. Paul's father was a passenger twice on the Underground Railroad. This well-organized, clandestine operation set thousands of people free. Get on board, the little children, get on board. The little children, get on board. The little children, there's room for many more. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Jordan River, chilly and cold, chills the body but not the soul. All around me looks so fine. Ask my Lord if all was mine. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
American history. I think I was about 12 years old, maybe younger, when the movie Showboat came out. And then I heard that this great singer was also a lawyer and was a very independent person. I think Robeson was different because he knew that America had to change. And nobody knows exactly how change is going to come, but he was trying. I guess I probably first saw him live in the late 30s, when I was at the end of my teens. I dropped out of college and I was living in New York. I think he inspired millions of people by his courage. An extraordinary combination of an athlete and a scholar. I mean, you couldn't help but be impressed by the physique of this tall man with broad shoulders. And he often spoke very softly in his deep bass voice. I'm told that his idea of a good weekend was to learn a new language. And I'm told that he knew like 20 languages. I think that as long as people like to sing, they'll sing some of the songs he taught us. Whether a new song like Old Man River, or an old song, could have been 100 years old, made up by a slave.
Just for fit the bell of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Just for fit the bell of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Just for fit the bell of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Just for fit the bell of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. You can talk about the men of Gideon, you can talk about the men of Saul. There's none like good old Joshua and the battle of Jericho. Up to the walls of Jericho he marched with spear in hand. Go below them ram horns, Joshua cried, 'cause a battle am in my hand. Then the ram sheep horns begin to blow, the trumpet begin to sound. Joshua commanded the children to shout, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Paul Robeson grew up imbued with the power of songs and stories he heard from his people. God-fearing people who valued family, hard work, and strong community bonds. His growing understanding of their plight was transformed into a boundless sense of pride for their unrelenting commitment to the struggle for human dignity. Just in the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Just in the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Paul heard all of the soulful expressions of African American music, gospels, ragtime, and so much more. He heard the sorrow songs of the spirituals and the heartfelt melancholy of the blues. The sorrow songs are an example of just how palpable sorrow has been for us. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long ways from home. A long ways from home. Come, my brother, Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long ways from home. A long ways from home. Come, my brother, a long ways from home. A long ways from home. It was the hard-working people of his community who taught him about forgiveness, compassion, and the centuries-old struggle for human dignity. They were his heroes, his kin, and from them he would learn their full array of plantation songs, laughing uproariously at the playful nature of his people, despite the daily difficulties they encountered. Put on the skillet, put on the lid. Mammy's gonna bake a little shortening bread. That ain't all she's gonna do. Mammy's gonna bake a little coffee too. Mammy's little baby loves shortening, shortening. Mammy's little baby loves shortening bread. Mammy's little baby loves shortening, shortening. Mammy's little baby loves shortening. Children lying in bed, two were sick and the other most dead. Sent for the doctor said, feed those children on shortening bread. Mammy's little baby loves shortening, shortening. Mammy's little baby loves shortening bread. Mammy's little baby loves shortening, shortening. Mammy's little baby loves shortening. Robeson was not ashamed of the spirituals. He thought of them as an authentic expression of the soul of his people. I'm not ashamed of them either. I sing them around the world, and I've seen how they connect people to each other in mixed settings. The enthusiastic response I received in Bosnia when Serbs and Croats, Muslims, Christians and Jews heard the spirituals and erupted, standing together and applauding as one, was remarkable and unforgettable. This music lifts us to a transcendent level of consciousness.
In 1925, in a theater in Greenwich Village, Paul Robeson and his accompanist, Lawrence Brown, made musical history, playing the first ever solo concert of Negro spirituals. This was a radical concept at the time, since most people thought this kind of music was best suited for the fields or to be heard in church. The first show was such a hit, even though they were thinking, spirituals? In a concert hall? It was so successful that they added a second. But Paul wondered, can I be an artist with just Negro songs? He didn't have to wonder long. Soon, Paul and Larry Brown made their first recordings, and those records went on to sell more than 50,000 copies. Paul already debuted on Broadway, was finishing a law degree at Columbia University, and playing professional football on the side. As an undergraduate, he had attended Rutgers University in New Jersey, one of the only 3 African-American students enrolled there, and had excelled in sports, earning 14 varsity letters and twice honored as a football All-American. But sport was just one of Paul's many interests, for he was a champion orator, sang in the Glee Club, and was valedictorian of his 1919 graduating class.
My father sent me to old Rutgers and resolved that I should be a man. And so I settled down in that noisy college town on the banks of the old Raritan.
Not that Paul could accompany the Glee Club when they left campus to go concertizing, since back then there was a such thing as Jim Crow, laws that enforced segregation. Jim Crow legalized racism and prevented black people from fully participating in American life. So Paul couldn't travel with his fellow singers, eat in the same restaurants, or even go to the same church. But that sort of thing only made Paul more determined to strive for a higher level of excellence and fully develop his potential.
Paul often sang the plantation song, Water Boy. His father was enslaved on a plantation in Martin County, North Carolina, and at the age of 15, he escaped and came north on the Underground Railroad. He would later return to visit his family and escape again. Can you believe that he worked his way through Lincoln University? It's called human resilience. And in 1876, he married Maria Louisa Bastille, a school teacher from a noted Philadelphia family.
Water boy, where are you hiding? If you don't come, I'm gonna tell your mammy. There ain't no hammer that's on this mountain that'll ring like mine, boys, that'll ring like mine. Done bust this rock, boys, from here to Macon, all the way to the jail, boys, all the way to the jail.
The family's youngest child, Paul loved his father like no other and would do whatever he could to please him. With pride, he would speak of his father as broad of shoulders, having the greatest speaking voice he had ever heard. There was nothing better for Paul in those formative days than being with his father, walking hand in hand in the community. Those looking on witnessed the vibrant nature of this very special relationship.
You jack of diamonds, you jack of diamonds. Now I know you are bold, boys. Yes, I know you are bold. You rob my pocket. Yes, you rob my pocket. You done rob my pocket. All for silver and a gold. Water boy, where are you hiding? If you don't come, I'm gonna tell your mammy. Water boy.
The folks who knew William Robeson would forever remember him as a kind, devoted, and dignified preacher. Paul's mother, Maria Louisa, had a heart for the poor and saw to it that they were adequately fed and clothed. Together, they ministered to their parishioners as a formidable team. Greatly respected and loved, they laid a steadfast foundation for their children to look beyond themselves, to reach out to the exploited, the disinherited, and the vulnerable.
Paul was 6 years old when his mother died from the burns she received in the terrible fire. His life would never be the same. but there was always Pop. And in every category, Pop was as good as it got. Success was not to be measured in terms of money and personal advancement, but rather the goal must be the richest and highest development of one's own potential.
Pop always pushed Paul to excel beyond his own expectations. A B on his report card was not acceptable. Amazingly, Paul made tremendous cultural and personal strides, even during the period of Jim Crow. But it wasn't easy. He met resistance from some of his peers, his teachers, and school administrators. Nevertheless, even by today's standards, few have excelled in so many fields and accomplished so much.
I met my brother the other day. I gave him my right hand, and just as soon as ever my back was turned, he scandalized my name. Now do you call that a brother? No, no. You call that a brother? No, no. You call that a brother? No, no. Scandalize my name. I met my sister the other day. I gave her my right hand, and just as soon as ever my back was turned, she too scandalized my name. Now do you call that a sister? No, no. You call that a sister? No, no. You call that a sister? No, no. Scandalize my name.
After Rutgers, Paul went to New York City. It was the time of the Harlem Renaissance, when uptown Manhattan was the creative center for artists of all kinds. It was the jazz age. The blues had left the farm for the big city, and Paul found himself in the middle of it all. Style, elegance, sophistication, urbanity, cool. That was Harlem in the day. By 1921, things were really picking up steam for Paul. He married Eslanda Cardoza Good, Essie for short, a beautiful and brilliant woman he'd met at Columbia. In the following year, they were off to England, where Paul was the star in a play.
On yonder hill there stands a creature. Who she is I do not know. I'll go and court her for her beauty. She must answer yes or no. Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. My father was a Spanish captain, went to sea a month ago. First she kissed me, then he left me, bid me always answer no. Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. Madam, in your face is beauty, on your lips red roses grow. Will you take me for your lover? Madam, answer yes or no. Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. Madam, I will give you jewels, I will make you rich and free. I will buy you silken dresses. Madam, will you marry me? Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. Madam, since you are so cruel, and that you do scorn me so, if I may not be your lover, Madam, will you let me go? Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. then I will stay with you forever. If you will not be unkind, madam, I have vowed to love you. Would you have me change my mind? Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. Hark, I hear the church bells ringing. Will you come and be my wife? Or, dear madam, have you settled to live single all your life? Oh, no, John, no, John, no, John, no. The show was called Voodoo, and to it, Paul brought a commanding physical presence, a regal stature, and naturally a very fine voice. In fact, as the rehearsals continued, the producers added even more songs for him to sing. The show was essentially Paul's vocal debut in London. It was a great start for this budding performer and the beginnings of a wildly successful international career.
The Robesons loved London, and London loved the Robesons. And Paul had access to the great intellectuals of the day: Aldous Huxley, H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, all sought him out. And it was also in London that Paul discovered Africa.
Paul was getting to know people from all around the world, and meeting people from Africa was an altogether new experience. While studying African culture and history, he found a treasure store. It was a treasure store of knowledge that he found, leading to a monumental shift in his self-understanding. Through his encounters with Africans in London, he has a profound epiphany, realizing that these were his people.
And by this time, how many languages had Paul mastered? 24 fluently. He could pick up a language the way most people pick up a hat. This was also a time of Paul's growing awareness of political activism. He began to see the wider net of social injustice in the world and the economic and cultural hardship imposed by colonial powers. What you might call today an understanding of globalization. And with that came the desire to level the playing field, if he could, to strike a blow with a song. Joining the fight for the rights of Welsh coal miners was Paul's first foray into international activism. It thrilled him, and he would go on singing for the Welsh people the rest of his life.
Sleep, my love, and peace attend thee all through the night. Guardian angels, God will lend thee all through the night. Soft the drowsy hours are creeping, healed and veiled in slumber sleeping. Love alone his watch is keeping all through the night.
Paul's discovery that ordinary people have immeasurable dignity and worth would propel him onto the international stage, giving him the opportunity to share his cultural story with theirs. He understood that we are one people across the divide of race, religion, culture, and nationality. His encounters with the common people of Britain would only reinforce this indwelling idea in his mind.
the solemn bell is ringing clear through the night. Thou, my love, art heavenward winging home through the night. Earthly dust from off thee shaken, soul immortal, thou shalt waken. With the last dim journey taken home through the night.
He was astonished by the fact that when he sang his American songs in different parts of the world, that the people wept or rejoiced, relating to the music at a profound level. He found that the themes of work, suffering, love, and protest are universal and unite us as one. This idea would be a driving force in his life.
On this side of the Atlantic, in 1930, Paul's popularity was going mainstream, for he was one of the best known, most successful entertainers in the world. His concerts were selling out. His records were consistently in the top 10, and he was appearing with great acclaim on Broadway in plays of Eugene O'Neill and William Shakespeare. His Othello was called an artistic and cultural triumph. 2 years later, at the age of 34, Paul opened in the Broadway revival of Showboat, and from that moment, Old Man River would forever be his. Reviewers were through the roof with this. The author of the novel, Edna Ferber, wrote after opening night, "I have never seen an ovation like that given any figure of the stage, concert hall, or the opera. The audience stood up and howled. They applauded and shouted and stamped. Since then, I have seen it exceeded but once. That was a few minutes later when Robeson finished singing Old Man River. The show stopped. He sang it again. The show stopped."
There's an old man called the Mississippi. That's the old man I don't like to be. What does he care if the world's got trouble? What does he care if the land ain't free? Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling along. He don't plant potatoes, he don't plant a garden, and them that plant 'em is soon forgotten. But Old Man River, he just keeps rolling along. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and racked with pain. Tote that budge, lift that bale, get a little drunk, and your land's in jail. But I get weary and sick trying. I'm tired of living and scared of dying. An old man river, he'll just keep rolling along.
Now, let's hear the way Paul changed the end of the song to put his personal stamp on it.
But I keeps laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying. An old man river, he'll just keep rolling along.
Can we hear it one more time? Wow! Yes! Wow! I am so filled with joy and energy, aren't you? Oh! Thank you so much for this evening, and thank you so much for the proceeds coming to the Peace Institute. Just a little story. After Lewis was killed, I needed to know who could raise a child that could kill. Doris was a mother just like me who tried her best to raise her son Charles. Charles was the young man who was convicted of killing my son Lewis. I met Doris. It is at that moment I realized that we were both impacted on that cold December afternoon. Actually, December 20th would make 26 years since my oldest son, Lewis, was killed. I felt her pain, and I saw her shame. I extended my hand and my heart of forgiveness, and Doris accepted. The Peace Institute was founded to transform society's response to homicide. Our work is guided by 7 core principles: love, unity, faith, hope, courage, justice, and that F word, not that one, forgiveness. Our work sits on a solid foundation that is built on peace. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. Peace in the beginning, peace in the middle, peace in the end. The heart of our work is that we reach out to families on both sides of homicide, victims' families and the perpetrators' families. In my community, there are no winners. Keeping Lewis's memory alive is the way that I pay it forward. The impact of our work extends to community and society through services and programs, outreach and advocacy, and training and education. I am so honored to be here with you this evening to celebrate with you. I came all the way from Dorchester. Thank you. And I am also honored that both Lexington and Belmont participate in the Walk for Peace. So I pray that next year at our 24th year as the Mother's Day Walk for Peace, that you will come to Dorchester. It's really only 25 minutes drive. Wasn't that bad? So I am just so honored to continue to celebrate, to continue to be here with you. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for really making these connections. You see, in my community, we do raise our children to have goals, dreams, and vision. Lewis, at a young age, wanted to be the first African-American president. While he didn't get to be a president, he has made a lasting impact. And 25 years later, we are celebrating, which is an oxymoron to celebrate after a death. But for me, I figured I have found my way of channeling my pain and anger into that of peace and action. It is because by the grace of God that I am here 26 years later. And I've still got a long way to go. And thank you again for your support. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your commitment. And thank you for putting this amazing piece of history together. I am renewed and rejuvenated, and watch out, world, here I come. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have a 10-minute intermission after the collection. And Simon will play, I think, some Scott Joplin.
But as Paul's star rose, the specter of war and evil was spreading in Europe. Fascism was on the rise in Italy and Spain, and Hitler was coming to power in Germany. The sound of marching jackboots drowned out the songs of peace and brotherhood. Paul saw the birth of the Soviet Union as something hopeful, a new force in the world that would oppose fascism. Only a dozen years before, the people of that vast land had risen up and opposed the Tsar. The system of serfdom and feudal slavery was over. It had been a stunning victory, and a new social experiment was underway. Paul's idealism was perfectly suited for the Soviet Union's constitution that stated the equality of all citizens of the USSR, irrespective of their nationality or race, in all fields of economic, state, social, and political life. In 1934, he and Larry Brown traveled to Russia for the first time.
Yo-heave-o, for once more, yes, for once more. Hey-yo-yam, hey-yo-yam, yes, so razik, yes, so daraz. Razaviomi bieliazu, razaviomi kodriavu. Ay da da, ay da, ay da da, ay da. Razaviomi kodriavu.
And they were an instant success everywhere they went. Paul also learned many new songs. He added these to his repertoire. He sang at the Bolshoi Opera, sold out. You couldn't get a ticket. The 2-week visit changed his life.
He made a visceral connection with Russia. He found that the music of Russia was similar to the music of his people. There was a deep sadness and a hint of mysticism about it. It was also in Russia that he felt like a full human being for the very first time in his life.
Ay da da, ay da, ay da da, ay da. She akari globaka. Volga, Volga, matrika. Yes, so razik, yes, so daraz. Hey-yo-yam, hey-yo-yam.
By the last half of the 1930s, Paul was the most famous black man in the world, giving concerts, acting in plays, and making movies. And it was written about him at the time. When his soul was at rest and set to music, his voice had a quiet radiance about it, like gold in sunlight. And more, he was speaking his mind about the injustices being done to his people of color. In 1937, Paul traveled to Spain to help in the Republicans' fight against Franco and the class war he waged. He visited hospitals, sang for children who were ill, and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the cause.
Brother, sing your country's anthem, shout your land's undying fame, like the wondrous tale of nations, with your people's golden name. Tell your father's noble story, raise on high your country's sight, join them in the final glory, brothers, lift your flag with mine. Freude, schöne Güte, Funken, Tochter aus Elysium. Wir betrinken feuertrunken, himmlische deine Heiligtum. Deine Zauber wenden wieder, was die Oderstreng geteilt. Aller Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weilt. Build a road of peace before us, build it wide and deep and long. Speed the slow and check the eager, help the weak and curb the strong. None shall push aside another, none shall let another fall. March beside me, oh my brother, all for one and one for all.
Paul returned home to the U.S. in 1940 and began to work in earnest for what would become known as the Civil Rights Movement. But don't think you can challenge the status quo or the right-wing power elite, for that matter, without them challenging you back. As early as 1941, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI had started a file on Paul, and by 1942, they were tapping his phone. It didn't matter that he was helping to sell millions of dollars worth of war bonds, or that he was a patriotic supporter of the Allies. No, there were politics at stake, and plenty of fear-mongering to go around. And God forbid that anyone get in the way of that, especially not a brilliant black man by the name of Paul Robeson. No, Robeson, they said, is dangerous because he is red. Robeson, they said, is dangerous because he is black. That made him just about twice as dangerous as anybody else.
I dreamed I saw Joe here last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
Robeson adamantly believed that the artist must engage in the social concerns of the day and never ceased wanting everyone to work for peace and human rights.
The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die.
He gave up his regular concert schedule to address the social concerns of his people in the United States. As he said to the press, I won't be singing except for the rights of my people for the next couple of years. No pretty songs, gentlemen. Time for some full citizenship.
And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they could never kill went on to organize, went on to organize.
He met with President Truman to encourage him to take action against lynchings in the United States. And he marched with American workers for better working conditions. And he sang at events to raise money for progressive organizations.
From San Diego up till Maine, in every mine and mill, where working men defend their rights, that's where you'll find Joe Hill. that's where you'll find Joe Hill.
Much more than an entertainer with a big booming voice, he used music to advance social change, uplifting the most marginalized in cultures around the world. He inspires us to think beyond ourselves, using whatever gifts we have to elevate the concerns of the common people.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
In 1949, Paul was invited to Paris to address the World Peace Conference, and there made a statement that has been a source of controversy ever since. He said, "It is unthinkable that American Negroes could go to war on behalf of those who have oppressed us for generations against the Soviet Union, which in one generation has raised our people to full human dignity." Misquoted in the American press as American Negroes would not defend their country, the words he did not say were labeled as treason. Also that year in Peekskill, New York, he appeared at an outdoor concert with a young Pete Seeger.
A few songs at the beginning of a concert in Peekskill, New York. The concert was originally scheduled for August 27th in the evening. It seems that there was a Unitarian couple at a farm near Peekskill, and he had sung on their farm for 200 people 2 years earlier, and then 1 year earlier he sang for 500 people there. And the third year they said that our little farm hasn't enough space for all the people who want to come. We rented a field about 1.5 miles from Peekskill, and rented 1,000 chairs, and rented a stage which could be bolted together, and a public address system. And during the afternoon of August 27th, Howard Fast, a great writer, and a committee of 10 to 15 people were setting up the chairs and bolting together the stage and so on, when in came a mob and attacked them. They fought off the mob for a while, but then the mob increased in size. They retreated to the stage and were there singing "We Shall Not Be Moved." But the mob simply made a big pile of all the chairs and set them on fire. So there was a huge bonfire there. Now the mob advanced on the stage. All of a sudden, there was a policeman watching the whole thing. He hadn't stopped anything, but now he realized people were going to be killed, and I guess he probably realized he'd be in court. What were you doing? And so he said, "Everybody go home. Everybody go home." And Howard Fast and the committee were lucky to get away with their lives, and the crowd went home. Well, now, Robeson got in the air, and he said, "It's America. I've got a right to sing. I'm going to sing." Well, the concert did take place, and I think 3 men stood in back of Robeson and a couple on each side, so that he couldn't be hit by a sharpshooter from the woods. And we all sat on the ground. We didn't have chairs now. It must have been a huge crowd. With all this publicity, there are 10 or 15, some say 20,000 people. And I and my family were in a hurry to go home, so we let most of the crowd leave. But I remember when we got up to the gate, I saw some glass in the said, "Uh-oh, be prepared to duck. Somebody may throw a stone." That was the understatement of the year for me. Around the corner was a pile of stones, each about the size of a tennis ball, and a young man throwing them with all his force at every car that went by. And around the next corner was another pile of stones on the other side of the street, and another young man. Wham! We were driving a Jeep station wagon, 3 windows on each side and a split windshield. Every single one of those windows was broken at least once or twice or more. So I think there must have been 10 or 15 no more piles of stones. And only about 40 or 50 feet beyond the fellow throwing stones was a policeman standing. And I jammed on the brake and tried to roll the window down. It was so splintered I only got about an inch down. And I shouted, "Officer, aren't you going to do something?" Here, stone after stone was being thrown. And the officer said, "Move on, move on." Knew all about it. Well, we were lucky to get out alive, I guess. However, within the past few months, I came to an idea which you might be interested in. You know, when you're inoculated against a disease, you get a small case of that disease, and the body manages to figure out how to handle it, and now your body does not get the disease. In a sense, that's what peak skill was for the United States of America.
Oh, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord.
Within a year, 1950, his passport was revoked, and for 8 years he was denied the right to travel. Between the FBI and Senator Joseph McCarthy's publicity-driven witch hunts, Robeson was at risk from all sides, racially and politically.
Although you see me going along so, oh yes, Lord, I have my trials here below. Oh yes, Lord. Oh, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah.
Prohibited from traveling and restricted from playing concerts, Robeson was isolated and cast as a pariah. Even the American people who had loved him so much turned their backs. Just for good measure, later that year, he was blacklisted.
He was anything but intimidated. He continued to speak out against the many manifestations of racial injustice. He was connected to the fighting spirit and the dignity of those who came before him, the enslaved, the abolitionists, the anti-lynching organizations, and other committed citizens who courageously spoke out. Robeson's voice was and remains an important, essential part of that continuing link for social justice in the United States. His life inspires us today to carry that sacred banner which declares that all lives matter.
Here was a man, a black man, the tallest tree in the forest, a giant for fairness and justice, with all of God's gifts, making complete sense about peace and justice and many, many issues in the world. But, very simply, he was too much for the dominant culture. He was too smart. He was too popular. He was too famous. He was too black, which made him just too much.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, oppressed so hard they could not stand. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh to let.
However undaunted he might be, standing up for right cost him. This giant of a man, an international figure for human rights, spoke truth to power, resulting in his mistreatment by authorities in his own country. A true patriot, he was fearless, much like his father, who held him to a higher standard of excellence. He was holding the country accountable to the sacred claims made by the founding fathers, that all are created equal, and he was willing to speak directly to the power elite.
Even Jackie Robinson, the first black Major League Baseball player, was asked to testify against Robeson before the House on Un-American Activities Committee. In the full glare of a staged media circus, he criticized Robeson's comments in Paris. Robinson would later regret having done this, but he feared for his career. And when it was done, it was done.
Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. My Lord, he calls me by the thunder. The trumpet sounds within my soul. I ain't got long to stay here.
Other distinguished African Americans and white friends, too, distanced themselves from Paul. There was fear in the African American community of reprisal and backlash from his statements. But that didn't stop Paul. In front of the House committee, when he was asked if he didn't like the U.S., why didn't he leave it? He answered,
"Because my father was a slave and my people died to build this country, I'm going to stay right here and have a part of it just like you. And no fascist-minded people are going to drive me from it. Is that clear?"
Deep river, my home the campground.
Those were very dark years for Paul Robeson, and his refusal to publicly demonize the Soviets cost him dearly. Letters and telegrams poured in from every continent expressing dismay that he had been stripped of his freedom. And while he was criticized here at home, he was a hero everywhere else. His music was an inspiration to people around the world.
All you want to go to that gospel feast, that promised land, where all is peace. Oh, deep river, Lord, I wanna cross over into campground.
But the 8 long years did pass. He never gave up and he never gave in. And by 1958, he got his passport back. And he did return to the concert stage. His first stop was Carnegie Hall, where his 2 shows sold out in a matter of hours. 1,000 people were turned away. Everywhere he went, the marquees read, "Sold out, sold out, sold out." But let's face it, now Paul was 60 years old.
Repeat after me.
It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Little David was small, but oh my. He fought big Goliath, who lay down and dieth. Little David was small, but oh my.
In 1958, he also published his autobiography, Here I Stand. While the book did help restore his standing in America, there were still lingering resentments and uncertainties. In the book, he forcefully states that he had never been a communist, and that his true commitment had always been for the full freedoms of his African American community. Praised and damned, he had paid a heavy price for advocating for peace.
Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. Oh, he made his home in that fish's abdomen. Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. I'm preaching this sermon to show it ain't necessarily so.
And still, our government wasn't finished with its dirty tricks. Shortly before a trip to Cuba, it's believed the U.S. government dosed Robeson with a powerful hallucinogenic drug. His resulting psychosis triggered a suicide attempt, and electrical shock therapy only worsened his condition. By the mid-1960s, Robeson's failing health would impact his ability to travel and sing. His 50 years pushing for civil rights were making a difference in the world, but he was tired and emotionally spent. The long-promised freedoms and equalities were on their way, and Paul knew he had played an important role. Pop, he said, would have been proud.
Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, I'm bound to go. Cross the wide Missouri. 7 long years since last I see thee. Away, your rolling river. Dear, 7 long years since last I see thee. Away, I'm bound to go. Cross the wide Missouri.
The death of Essie in 1965 was a severe blow. And to be near family, he moved in with his sister in Philadelphia. For his last 10 years, he lived quietly, out of the spotlight.
I want you to know that I'm the same Paul, dedicated as ever to the worldwide cause of humanity, for peace, freedom, and brotherhood. Though ill health has compelled my retirement, you can be sure that in my heart, I go on singing.
Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, your rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, I'm bound to go. Cross the wide Missouri.
On January 23, 1975, Paul Robeson passed from this world to the next. As his son, Paul Jr. would say at his father's tribute, "The world has lost a great and gentle warrior. Once in a lifetime, a human being comes along who stands head and shoulders above the rest. Paul Robeson was such a man. His life was a courageous example of integrity and discipline in the service of peace. Today, we stand on those shoulders and continue the struggle, knowing full well that we must be the change we seek. We are the warriors now who must speak out and fight against injustice and be the advocates for peace. What Paul Robeson understood was that we are one people with everything in common. His gift was to use music to help us connect, and he has given us this gift so that we can go on singing.
Political systems come and go, but the soul of the people endures. To live in freedom, to live equally and without fear, to provide the precious gift of opportunity for our children, to reap the harvest of our labors, that everlasting hope for which we have long fought, suffered, and died, is today the inevitable destiny we shall so surely attain.
But I keeps laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying, and oh,